man was walking in the woods one day when he saw a bear out of the corner of his eye. He stopped, said a silent prayer. God, I know you can do all things. Will you please make this bear a fellow Christian? The bear caught up to the man, placed his paw on the man's shoulder, and said, Brother, will you pray with me? Dear God, for this meal that I am about to receive, make me truly thankful. This is The Christian Bear with Dr. Ben Hilsman. Welcome to episode 47 of The Christian Bear. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Hilskamp. Before I introduce today's guest, I want to thank all our guests for a successful series on belief. The series has been downloaded by listeners on 3 continents, in at least 10 countries, 5 Canadian provinces, and at least 20 U.S. states. 19 guests have given up hours of their time to give their perspectives on belief, faith, understanding, tears, love, resiliency, and grace. Today's episode is the last in the series on belief. I will have a few holiday-themed episodes before the Christian Bear takes January off from posting content so that I can focus on writing. The podcast will be back on Tuesday, January the 31st, with the first episode in a new series on big questions of being human. All that said, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome Zac Boyer, who uses they-them pronouns, to the podcast. Zac is the Director of Programs and Marketing at Stonewall Columbus. A veteran of higher education and healthcare administration, Zac previously worked at the Cleveland Clinic, where they created the LGBTQ+ patient care curriculum, and at Columbus College of Art and Design, where they advised a multicultural portfolio of student organizations. Zac, their husband, and their feline children live in the historic Old Town East section of Columbus, Ohio. Please join me in welcoming Zac Boyer to the Christian Bear. So Zac, thank you again for joining us on this episode of the Christian Bear. I'm really happy to have your perspective today, wisdom in talking about belief and faith, and how we come to hold the beliefs that we hold. So I've been sarcastically calling this my quote-unquote easy question. What do you believe?
Well, beliefs. I know it sounds like such an easy question, but it's such a difficult question because as someone who has grown up, like my faith background growing up was Pentecostal, which has a very specific set of beliefs that kind of shape an overall view of how the world works, whether that's metaphysically or otherwise. But I'm also someone living with various mental illnesses. So then that kind of perspective kind of changes what you believe, because it's like, can I trust myself to believe what I believe? What I believe. I believe that it's difficult. I'm trying to just come up with something to say, but that is really difficult because as soon as I try to firmly say I believe this, something will happen or someone will say something to give me a different perspective, or I will see something in action that makes me think maybe that belief isn't as firm as I thought. So I think that I have some fluidity within my beliefs based on new information that's presented, which is sometimes hard to explain because then it sounds like you don't believe anything, but it's more of I like to see things play out and then base my beliefs on that. So it's a little bit difficult to hammer that down because a lot of what I believe and what I've come to believe is based off of lived experiences and also hearing other people talk about their lived experiences. So a lot of it is tied to people. So I believe people, and as messy as that can be, because people can lie, people can only have a certain amount of information to work with, so their perspective is only informed from a very specific set of information. So I try my best to just lead with positive intent and go from there when it comes to belief. Do you have Did I get it? Did I do it?
That was a great answer. Thank you.
Okay.
So I really resonate with what you just said, particularly about talking about people. I agree that while people can let us down, while people can be mean, hurtful, even evil, um, I, in my own belief, I definitely see, a God presence, a God in community, in people. So I wonder if you could comment a little bit more from your experience on, kind of putting faith in people, and what that's meant to you, or perhaps means to you now
Yeah.
in your work and life.
I think putting faith in people is risky, but also can be so beneficial because we can see just the goodness that people are able to produce. Um, I think that it can lead to a lot of trial and error, a lot of letdown because people are human and humans aren't perfect. But I do think that that takes a little bit of thinking of things dialectically and thinking of like there can be more than one thing at play and more than one thing true at a time. Um, so it's difficult for me sometimes to say like, okay, well, I need to base this on facts, not on what someone is saying or based on what I'm witnessing, because we only have a certain amount of information that we can work with any given situation. Um, but I do think that when we believe people and we put faith into trusting that people are coming about with good intentions and that people are doing their best. And I think also just reminding that, like, the grace and the flexibility that I want to receive, I also need to extend. So the understanding that as someone living with a disability, as someone who is living in a transphobic, queer phobic, fat phobic world, that some of the accommodations or some of the grace that I would like to see for myself, I need to be able to extend that even when it's frustrating. Even when I can think like, well, I know that this person did it for this reason. It's like, I don't know that. I can make an assumption based on experience, but I can never truly know because same way that no one knows what I'm going through, I don't know what they're going through. So a lot of it is trying not to be disappointed when things come out, but a lot of it is also just making sure that you have a plan B to where if you have trusted somebody or you have like put faith in someone to do something or to not do something, just making sure that, all right, well, let me cover my butt to make sure I'm taken care of and what needs to get done gets done, you know?
Definitely. I really like how you said, and again, I may not be quoting you exactly correctly, but how you spoke about giving grace even if you're not necessarily receiving that grace in return.
Yeah.
Could you go into a little bit more depth about areas that you're working on where perhaps you're trying to put into the world things that you're not receiving from the world or you're not seeing in the world?
I have a lot of hot takes that I could use this with, but I'm going to try to keep them generic and just give hypotheticals that may or may not be real. Um, I think that oftentimes we can make assumptions based on what we see and what we're witnessing. Um, and sometimes that can overpower what people are doing behind the scenes. I think as someone who has worked for an organization that is community based, that is serving the community, oftentimes when either the organization or individual people haven't showed up in certain spaces, we've received a lot of critique, and I feel that. But I also don't think that oftentimes folks are looking at what's happening behind the scenes or taking into account that pause that I've now built into an everyday practice of saying, like, okay, this is my knee jerk reaction, but let me pause and think, I don't have all the information present. I don't know what's happening behind the scenes, whether that is organizationally or happening in terms of like I know how my organization works. I don't know how other people's jobs are. I don't know the red tape that people might have to go through if it's a larger organization. And then when we break it down to the more human element, I don't know what that person's going through, whether that be personally, physically, mentally. Uh, there's so many different factors at play that whenever we start wagging our fingers at organizations and using a nameless name instead of just pausing and thinking, even though I'm upset with the either action that has happened or lack of action, I need to pause and think, oh, that's not just an organizational name, that those are people, and those people are messy humans just like I'm a messy human. And if I can pause and think, I don't have all the information. I cannot make I cannot make a completely informed decision or make a completely informed judgment because I don't know what's going on. So I think that sometimes that is the piece that's difficult to put into practice, because we can build up narratives in our head, or we can create a narrative that it fits the anger or it fits the feelings that we might have, so it feels justified. But what's even harder is to pause and say, I don't have all the information. I can make an assumption, but I don't know. And when I think of how that ties into my overall beliefs, I can think of at least what I was taught growing up is that there's a lot of imperfect people, and there was someone who was sent here to forgive and to provide grace, regardless of people deserved it or not, regardless of how many times people mess up. So when I think about how faith directly plays into how I try to navigate life now, I can see myself trying to extend the grace that I was told that Christ gives. Christ is, in terms of how I grew up believing and what I was taught, is that Christ was put on this earth to forgive us regardless if we deserved it or not. And so if folks are saying that they are trying to achieve a level of mirroring Christ-likeness, maybe it's just chilling the fuck out and realizing, like, I don't know what's going on with everyone. And you know what? I can forgive and I can give grace because that's what I want to receive. And not for, well, I have to do this because Sky Daddy told me to. I'm doing this because this is the person I want to be. And this is the world that I want to live in. I want to live in a world where, yeah, someone might not show up for an event, or someone might be an hour late to work, but I don't know what's going on with that person. Maybe they worked late the night before. Maybe they took a call at home, or maybe they are working on a larger project that hasn't come out yet. And so just understanding that we just got to be patient and just try to assume the best. And I think that can sound kind of Pollyanna-ish, but the alternative is a lot of wasted energy, at least what from my experience and from how anxiety and how other fun things that happen inside my head. It's a lot easier for me to assume positive intent. It's a lot easier for me to let things go, because the alternative are a bunch of situations that I can't control. I can't make an outcome differently. If something's already happened or something's already passed, there's nothing I can do about it. It's done. So what's the point in putting all that extra energy into it?
Thank you. That is the closest, Zach, in the time that I've known you, and I've only really known you for a little less than a year at this point, but that I could call something you've said preaching. that what you just said, that will preach.
I know.
And I wish I could snap. I literally cannot snap. But that was wonderful. Thank you.
Of course. My dad would be proud.
And I have to say, I resonate with when you said, basically to chill the fuck out.
Essentially.
I don't know if you remember, but Stonewall earlier in the year did a blood drive. Yeah. And I remember your messaging around, maybe even on social media, kind of saying to folks, okay, I know some of you will have a problem with this, gay-centered or queer-centered doing a blood drive, but we need blood, period, end of story.
Yeah.
And I remember because my first knee-jerk reaction was, why the hell is Stonewall Columbus, the Central Ohio's Queer Center, sponsoring a blood drive where some members of their community, our community, can't give blood, me included? So I really appreciate that about your perspective, about your approach. I think it's definitely beneficial. And for those of us who are still recovering, knee jerk people, uh,
Yeah.
it definitely is a model that I try to follow. So thank you.
And I mean, I can't take credit for it. I think that there is a lot of research that's gone into trying to function in that way, specifically DBT or dialectic behavior therapy. Shout out to Marshall Linehan. Thank you for doing that research and for providing so many tools for people like me. But also, like, just looking at bottom lines, I think is sometimes really important. Looking at specifically, thank you for bringing up the example of blood drives. Like, the bottom line with that is after COVID and still in the midst of COVID, there is a significant shortage of blood banks are running low, and understanding that a blood boycott doesn't really help anything. If anything, it is just perpetuating some outdated information, because I think that when it comes to something like a lifetime ban, not based on research, not based on science, but based on this was quickly rushed during the early days of the HIV/AIDS crisis. Um, but understanding that, like, there is also a legacy that queer women, lesbians, bisexual women, pan women, there's a legacy and a history of how that work has impacted our community in a time where folks needed more blood transfusions. So I think that when we look at the overall scope of the bottom line, like, the bottom line is that there are people with a myriad of health conditions that require regular blood transfusions, as well as accidents that constantly happen, car accidents, work accidents. And there are trans people, gay people, lesbians, everybody under the queer umbrella. We also need blood. And I think the best thing we can do is, if we are not able to do something, if we're restricted from doing something, okay, great. Let's find someone else who can. So that's whenever we can have additional action. And that's always my call to action anytime we have a blood drive is, are you unable to donate because of restrictive policies? Like, we get it. It sucks. Most of us here can't donate either. But what we can do is we can talk to other people, because the bottom line is that blood saves lives, and we have to find a way to get around that. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. So, I asked this question, or this next question, with sort of already probably knowing your initial answer, but has any experience made you question your beliefs?
Oof. God, I can point to so many different points. I think the first few times that I can really think back to it really are tied to church, and tied to my time growing up in the Pentecostal faith. And I think something that really frustrated me, especially within a faith that is like the Pentecostal faith, in that, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of metaphysical things like healing, not just healing in the metaphorical sense, healing as in you go up to the pulpit, and you're going to have hands laid on you. There's going to be anointing oil. And I'm supposed to believe without question that whenever I go up there and I ask for something, if I believe enough, then it's going to be directly changed right then, right there, very literally. So I remember being this fat gay kid and thinking, like, there are two major things that I don't want in my life. And this preacher man, who is quote unquote removing tumors from people, if he can remove a tumor, and he's saying that no ask is too little and nothing is too big for God. If I go up there and I whisper in this man's ear, I want God to make me normal. And I'm being told that if I believe enough, and I'm being told that if my faith is strong enough, then no matter how big, no matter how small, God is going to change it right there on the spot, magically, because that's how it was being presented. And I wake up from quote unquote falling out, and I'm still fat. I still like guys. That makes a little 8-year-old question. And then a couple years down the line, when I finally tell somebody, and it then turns around into this older kid doing some stuff that isn't great and taking advantage of that vulnerability, asking God, like, Why is this happening to me? Why am I still in this body? Why am I still having these thoughts? Why am I now having these thoughts? And then someone else told me they were having these thoughts and we explored it together. And now I'm being told that like all these horrible things, like just asking why is it like this? Is my faith not good enough? Did I not believe enough? Did I not pray enough? So then, me being the little weirdo that I am, went the opposite direction. Okay, well, if God can't do it, maybe the devil can. Okay, so the devil's real just like God's real. Okay, Satan, I relinquish whatever my immortal soul is. Give me telekinesis like Jean Grey. Like, I've heard you can do some pretty wild shit, more wild than Sky Daddy. So tell me what you can do. And nothing happened there either. And so then thinking as like now an 11, 12-year-old, like, okay, I'm being told that I need to pray without ceasing, and I need to just have the faith of a grain of mustard seed. And I feel like I have a lot of faith. I feel like I'm believing and I'm putting a lot of energy into these things, and things aren't happening. And now I have all these secrets, and now I'm getting older, and my body's changing in ways that are confusing. And I still have all these questions, and I'd like to think that I'm believing and my faith is there, but yeah, it's one of those things where it's like very young. I started questioning things because I felt like instead of it just being like an overall like I've questioned things, like I could point to like, okay, I did this on this date and God didn't do anything. I did this on this date and Satan didn't do anything. And so those things start to add up for a queer, fat teenager that's dealing with mental health and dealing with trauma that I did not have the resources to navigate. So I think that overall led to just instead of giving up on faith, I think up until I went to college, it was more of like, let's double the fuck down and let's believe even harder. Let's pray even harder. Let's become a deacon of outreach ministry. Let's sing every service, whether it's Wednesday night or whatever. Like, I'm going to use the gifts. I'm going to use my talents so that God doesn't take them away. I'm not going to bury my talents. I'm going to use them. Like every biblical metaphor you can think of, I applied them directly. And I'm like, okay, I have to do this because if I believe enough, then eventually these things about me are going to change. And that got to be a little old once I got to college. And I think the final straw I had was I tried to join a Christian fraternity. Shout out to Sigma Alpha Beta at Capital University, RIP, 2007 through, I think the chapter died in 2022 this year. So we had a good run. Shout out to y'all. Shout out to SAB. And I thought I was running away still. I thought I was still doubling down. But what I realized is that the Lutheran faith is very different than the Pentecostal faith, and that there is a lot of flexibility. Even in 2010, like there was a lot of flexibility, and there was a lot of like, instead of coming to a space where I could just kind of keep pushing down these parts of me, I met people who were also people of faith who weren't suppressing those parts of them. And they were telling me that God loves us in every facet of our being. And so then I got frustrated and I said, okay, well, what do I believe now? Because now I'm being told that I can be both of these things. But if I can be both of these things, then why didn't God ever change me? Like and now that makes total sense because there was nothing to change. But it was frustrating. Because now I'm like, okay, so then what else have I been told my whole life that's completely different and that people can just have a different perspective about? So then I started thinking more about like broader concepts. I started taking, again, coming from rural Appalachia and then going to a liberal arts school and taking classes like global awareness and learning about things from a perspective that's very different than a Southern Ohio curriculum when it comes to history, when it comes to talking about marginalized groups. And then that's when I started going the opposite direction. And so instead of doubling down on faith and doubling down on trying to do every check mark for Sky Daddy, I was doing my best to like, okay, well, if none of this matters, then let's have some fun. And so then I doubled down on everything else, thinking that that would be like, I guess it's kind of nihilist of just like, well, none of this matters. If everything that I've been told that is very black and white for years, if that's more gray and flexible, then why not? Um, and in that, I got a little bit more angry because I felt like I wasted time. I felt like I wasted energy. I felt like a lot of what I put my passion and efforts into was wasted. Um, and that made me angry. That made me very angry of like, well, I could have been living like this for how long? And I restricted myself, not be like, it's not that I wasn't being, it's not that was restricting my own self. Other people told me that I needed to restrict myself and I needed to shrink myself. I needed to change myself. And now I'm finding out that after 20 years, I don't have to. That made me mad because then it's like, it's no longer this nameless, faithless faith. It's no longer the church told me to. It's my dad told me this, whether at home or from the pulpit. My mom told me this in Sunday school because my mom's a Sunday school teacher. And so it became less of I'm angry at God and more of I'm angry at these humans that told me that I have to believe this. That from a very young age was there are two options, eternal damnation or saving up your treasures in heaven. And now I'm realizing that there's a little bit more flexibility than that. Yeah, I was pissed. And for a long time, that's kind of where I stayed. I'd probably say that like staying in that angry spot lasted for probably ages 20 through, I would say, into my late 20s. Like I realize that I'm only 30 and that's not that old, and there's so much more life to live and there's so many more experiences to have. But to go from 20 years of like, I don't need to question this, I'm just going to believe this, and if I believe hard enough, things are going to be great and God's going to change everything and save me and all the above, to then just being angry, that's a lot. That's a lot to just, that's one, a hard left. And it's also hard to, I don't know where to put that, because along with faith being something that is metaphysical and a relationship, a lot of that was community amongst those humans. And I didn't have that anymore. And I felt like, and still feel like, I can't go back to that just because I know that those spaces are so contingent on you can come as you are, but once you're here, then you got to change. And you can come as you are, but you can't take up this much space, or you can't share this piece of you. So understanding that there's a significant loss that comes with the community piece of leaving the church, as well as someone who I, as woo-woo as this might sound, I love ritual. I love ritual. I love the presentation of it. To go from a faith that is very much about ritual and very much about practice, that part felt empty as well. And trying to fill those holes in other spaces kind of felt like it was, it felt silly, because it's like, how do you take something that has, it's different when you're the only one doing a practice versus if the entire congregation is doing something, or if other people are talking about like, well, when I'm at home, my practice is this. So it's to go from that to, well, I read on the internet that some people can do this and it makes them feel good, and now I want to do it, but now I have to explain why I'm doing it to all these other people. There's a bit of a normacy built into the ritual of faith. Whereas when it's no longer directly tied to an organized religion, it's like, oh, this is just my ritual. And people are like, oh, okay. Um, so I felt like in that time of anger, I had a lot of space where I felt like I was missing pieces, but it didn't feel like those pieces could be filled by going back to faith. And I think that's where a combination of therapy, uh, age, oh my God, age has a huge piece to do with it. And I know for anyone who's in their 20s, they're going to be like rolling their eyes and angry about this. But like, just the more life that you live and the more that you start listening, you learn so much. And I feel like I did not start doing that. I was so strong headed until like my mid to late 20s, because I was angry. I was angry and I was tired of hearing of people telling me what to do and giving me absolutes, because that's what the church did and that's what my parents did. And I'm now discovering that it's not so absolute. So I stopped listening and I stopped gaining the knowledge. And I just thought like anyone who tells me anything is just blowing smoke up my ass. So being at a space now where I'm realizing that listening is probably the best thing that anyone can do, whether that is in the workplace, within a community space with loved ones. The best thing we can do is listen, because we're going to learn so much more than if we're just spending time being angry or spending time um, just shutting ourselves off. And that's not to say that I don't still do this a bit. And it's not to say that I'm still not angry, but being able to process it in a more healthy way, I feel like wastes less emotional energy. At least that's how I feel now. Um, but of course, every day is going to be a little bit different. So on some days, I'm like, hell yeah, I'm processing things. I'm feeling my feelings as they come. But there are going to be days where it's going to be hard to be kind. It's going to be hard to not let those first really rude or um, shady things come out of my mouth, because that's going to create a situation that isn't conducive to. No one's going to want to speak and for you to listen if the first thoughts come out. Um, yeah, I got a little lost there, so sorry about that. You can cut that part out.
No, you didn't get lost at all, in my
Oh,
opinion. You actually, the point at which, at least in my, from my listening, where you may think that you got lost was actually the point at which I was going to ask a follow up question, which you naturally got to. So, no, I thought that was a very good
thank you.
response. So, again, one of my wonderfully easy questions: if you had to boil down your beliefs, whether
Mm.
those be religious, faith, human, social, whatever, if you had to boil down those beliefs into one, maybe two core fundamental beliefs, what would that belief or beliefs be?
Mm, I believe that none of us know everything in any given situation. Um, and that even if we have all the information, that there's going to be so much nuance, that whether that be this word holds a different meaning or holds a different weight for this person. So even if we have word for word what a situation is or what a conversation is, we'll never know the context. And so I think just something that is my core belief is that regardless of the situation, it could be something as mundane as um, not agreeing with how someone greets someone during an event, or it could be something as serious as a deposition. We don't have all the information. We can do our best to kind of work with what we have, but my core belief is that you never know everything. And so being at peace with that is something that is very difficult, but I think that is something that I want to make sure that I stay working on, and that I think it's something that we should all work on, because I think that at least in my how my brain works, that helps me let go of a lot. It helps me let go of like, okay, well, there's nothing I can do about it, and I don't know everything, so just letting that go. I also another core belief, an essence or a boiled down version, is that there's going to be like probably it has nothing to do with what we've been talking about, but one of my core beliefs is that at any given time you are both the hero, the main character of a story, but you're also at the same time you can be the villain on the next page. I think that is huge. And I think that when we think of whether it be historical figures or community figures or even just people in our lives, we want to be like, this person is good, this person is bad. We want to put people in this binary category. Like, I don't know, we might do that with other things like other hard concepts. But I think having some fluidity in the understanding that, like, one day you're going to be the villain. And if you want to get back to not being the villain, you have to be able to just let your ego go and apologize when necessary, but also recognizing that some villains are fucking cool and they're not always going to be villains to everybody. some people are going to be like, yeah, that makes total sense. Ursula was fucking right. Jafar, maybe not so much. But like there are going to be some villains that they were right. They were justified. I'm listening to a podcast now that's recapping True Blood, which was like a college obsession of mine. And if anyone who's listening watched True Blood, there is like this church figure that like mirrors evangelical Southern ministers. And the character's name is Steve Newland, and it was the Church of Light. Now I'm remembering the details. But I was listening to the podcast where they were interviewing the actor who played him, and he was like, as much as this man, it's not a one-for-one metaphor, as much as this man represents a lot of evangelical folks who are doing some pretty nasty, not good stuff, when you look at the show, his character was also correct. He was an anti-vampire. If you haven't watched True Blood, it's about vampires. He was an anti-vampire person, and he was leading a cause against vampires, which is not a one-to-one metaphor with vampires being marginalized identities and them being the oppressors. Because the reality is that as much as we're rooting for the vampires in that series, they are killing people. Like, a lot of the folks in that series are murdering humans. And so as much as this character is being labeled and being pitched as the antagonist and the villain, there is some accuracy and some good points. So just understanding that just as much as you are the hero today, you could be the villain tomorrow, but also understanding that like it's up to you if you're an anti-hero or if you are going to actually be able to live out your values. So sometimes you get painted as the villain, and it is what it is. You just got to be at peace with it. Sorry to be so in depth in a metaphor, but like that helps me sometimes.
No, I think that was a perfectly good answer for that question. So thank you. So Zach, like I said before we started recording, I love to give time at the end of the interviews for folks to platform anything, to promote anything that they're working on. Or to discuss anything we didn't get to in talking about belief. So the floor is yours.
Okay, so when thinking of things to plug, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about my work at the center. We're rounding out 2022 with the This is Trans exhibit in the gallery. We're also going to have quite a few other exhibits that are going to be going on. I am so grateful that I've spoken with artists and coordinated, and we have shows going all the way through August of 2023. So if nothing else, come to the center and check out some art. We're also going to be really relaunching a lot of specific programs that I just want people to keep an eye out for. They can follow us on social, as well as sign up for member email updates with Stonewall. So feel free to check those out. That's where we're going to be pumping a lot of things, but we have a lot of really exciting art shows coming up. So would love to have people in the center and checking those out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Zach. And again, thank you so much for being on this episode of The Christian Bear. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate your thoughts. And again, your wisdom in speaking about belief in your life and how you're putting that into practice in your work.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. Thank you for having me.
This has been The Christian Bear with Dr. Ben Hilskamp.